What's up, guys, and welcome back to try two of the initial starting of the podcast. Sorry for the technical difficulty. This is the third podcast, so there will be mistakes. So, welcome to this again. This is our third podcast, and today we have Adriel Boals, a UNT Psychology Professor from that I've met through WinStar. How long? When did we meet? 2013.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit earlier. I think it's
Yeah.
about 2013 is a good estimate.
Because Black Friday came, and that's when I first stepped foot into the casino. And I assume that was when you also first stepped into the casino.
It was. So when Black Friday happened, that was 2011, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd been playing poker for maybe 6 months at that point, and I'd been playing exclusively online. And so I was one of the people contributing to how lucrative poker was at that time. And I remember the day of Black Friday, I came home from work and I logged in and I couldn't get into any of my online poker accounts. I'm like, what the heck is this? So I went to WinStar that night and went and played. And then I guess from there on out, I became a WinStar regular.
Yeah. So tell us about your journey, because when I met you, I actually targeted you as a player because
That was smart.
because I saw the skills. And this when I was making my adjustment from online to live as well. So I wasn't that good in terms of the adjustments. But I knew that the game selection and you got to target the players.
Oh yeah, I was definitely a target that when I first started going up to WinStar. I think that my first year of playing poker, I was definitely a losing player. My first year, no doubt, I was taking my lumps, but learning some lessons along the way, such that in year 2 of poker playing for me, I'd say I was break even or somewhere around break even, and then by year 3, I was a winning player, and every year since, it's just been a matter of how much I can make each year.
Yeah, because I remember we also tried to do a charity poker study group. That didn't take off, but at that point that was maybe 5 years, and you were actually a winning player by then. That's why I asked you to get involved with this. So you're actually your game accelerated really fast.
Yeah, it did. Well, I put a lot of time and effort, so it didn't happen by random chance. And I also think that I'm a slow learner. I really am. I'm not someone who learns really quickly, but I think that I have a high ceiling. So maybe I'd start behind everyone else, but then at some point I kind of get it. Everything starts to click, and then my ceiling tends to be fairly high. So, but in year 5, when we were offering some poker classes for free, it didn't really take off. And to be honest, I was a little surprised. But now that I've played a little bit longer, maybe less surprised that this general lack of interest in studying poker and getting better poker. I think players kind of know what they know and they're comfortable at that level, even if they're not always winning. And just most poker players don't have a strong interest in doing the work that it takes to improve their game.
They just want to gamble it up.
They just want to gamble it up, and they learned a couple little things that works for them, and they just want to keep doing that.
So your background is psychology, and you're in the UNT department, but can you tell more about your psychology background then, and how does it play into this poker?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Because I definitely think that what I've learned on the poker table definitely helps me. It helps me both in my career. It also helps me in life, but also vice versa. And that what I've learned in psychology definitely helps me out at the poker table. So I'm a professor at the University of North Texas, Department of Psychology. I'm specifically in the behavioral sciences. In fact, I'm the director of the behavioral sciences program. And so I'm not a clinician. So I'm not the type of psychologist who does counseling or therapy where you work one-on-one with clients and do therapy. I know a little bit about it, but I'm not trained to do it. I'd probably be really bad at it if I tried to do it. I'm much more focused on the science research side of it all. So I do psychological science. Most of my time is spent with my research lab, and then we have research questions, and we go out and design research studies to gather empirical evidence to support or not support hypotheses and theories. So it's basically applying the scientific method, but to psychology. Maybe a good analogy I use is if someone's a medical doctor, you can go be a practitioner and go do surgeries or mend broken bones. But some medical doctors instead decide to become researchers, and they spend their day working in a lab trying to try to discover cures and different medicines and so forth. So it's kind of the same thing in psychology. We have the therapists who are out seeing people every day trying to, instead of mending broken bones, maybe mending broken hearts. But I'm on the backside. I'm the person back in the laboratory doing the science.
So how deep of how much psychology do you actually use in your poker game, and where does it reflect it?
Yeah, quite a bit, because I'm very amazed at how consistent people are in their tendencies over time. I mean, some people just want to be wild gamblers. Some people are very conservative and tight in the way they play. And that actually took me, because I'm a slow learner, it took me longer than it should have to realize how consistent people are. And even when they try to mix it up a little bit, they don't really mix it up, and they don't. Yeah. And when they do try, they don't do it very well either. So understanding that people are very consistent. So when you sit down at the table, just spending time. I mean, I use an analogy of like NFL head coaches. They spend hours and hours of looking at game film of their opponents for that upcoming week to understand what their tendencies are. Mm-hmm. You do the same thing at the poker table. Instead of watching game film, it's happening right in front of you. What are, the guy sitting to the left of me? What are his tendencies? After about 30 minutes, you have a pretty good idea, if you extrapolate really well, of what everyone's tendencies are. So that's their behavioral tendencies. That's the psychology piece that can really work in your favor. But you got to do the work. You got to watch the game film to know what the tendencies are.
So it's basically saying we could pull players into certain behavioral patterns, right? The players that tend to bluff too much, the players that tend to call too much or raise too much. So, and they all say, no, I vary, I mix up my game, but those are just like blips on the radar. Their frequency and the amount of time to do it has no relevance to their behavioral pattern.
I think you described it very, very well. Obviously in poker terms, we talk about playing with balanced ranges.
Yeah.
And I don't even play with the balanced range, right? Because I think the level we're playing at, exploitative, is such better. But if you start playing at the more elite levels, you got to really balance out your ranges. But the players we play against that play up at WinStar, that play up at no one's balancing their ranges in the way that you truly have to do to be unexploitable.
Right. So then you categorize their behavioral patterns, and then you develop a strategy to exploit that behavior pattern.
Absolutely. You find where the imbalances are, and based on that person's imbalance, then this is the correct adjustment. But that person over there has a different set of imbalances.
Right.
So these would be the correct adjustments to take advantage of the mistakes that they're making.
Right. So then if poker is a game of that behavioral patterns, and behavioral patterns can be altered, right? Because through habits and iterations and changes.
Absolutely.
So can we then use this scientific method and apply it to poker so that we could maybe help change people's behavioral patterns?
I think if they wanted to, I think everyone's got their tendencies. And some people I think if they're conservative in life, they tend to be a little bit conservative at the table and vice versa. But it doesn't mean you can't change your pattern. So people tend to, if you look at like personality traits, like for instance, introversion, extroversion, it's a pretty, personality traits tend to be fairly consistent over time, but also vary by situation. Some people say, well, if I'm with a small group of friends, I tend to be very outgoing and extroverted. But if I'm in a large party where, I don't know many people, I tend to be more introverted. So it can vary, but even across situations and across time and places, most people have pretty strong personality tendencies. And so at the poker table, you can do it, but it's going to take some work and effort. Someone who's conservative by nature to say, I'm really going to start playing much more aggressive, they can do it, but it's going to take effort. It won't come naturally to them.
Okay. So then we want to go, this is where we start hawking into the idea of cognitive therapy, because it is behavioral therapy, and this is your field also, and it also ties into poker. So can you give the listeners more idea about what cognitive therapy is?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So cognitive therapy is a brand of psychotherapy that we use in psychology. The underlying assumption is that a lot of psychological disorders, especially like depression and anxiety, that one of the major underlying causes is people have self-defeating thoughts and cognitions. And you'd be surprised when you actually get to people are being honest and come in and talk. People really oftentimes have some really negative thoughts about themselves. They think that they're unworthy of love, that they're incompetent, that they have really low self-esteem, just don't think very highly of themselves, don't think that they deserve good things in life. And I know when I say that out loud, like, who thinks that? But a lot of people have those types of thoughts that they beat themselves up over. So cognitive therapy is designed to try to identify those self-defeating and toxic thoughts and to change them. Let's challenge some of these beliefs that you have about yourself. You say that no one wants to talk to you. What's your evidence for that? And someone might say something like, well, the other day at work, I went to use the restroom. I passed by a coworker in the hallway, and they walked right past me. Didn't say a thing. Like, okay, well, what's your attribution? What's your interpretation of that? No one at work likes me, no one wants to talk to me. Well, did you consider the possibility that maybe the person was just in a hurry, doesn't have time to stop and talk to every single person in the workplace? What if the next time that happens, you say hi to them and see if they don't respond or not? Because maybe part of it is you don't talk to anybody, And so then they're a little freaked out by that, and they don't take the initiative to talk with you. So you challenge them. You get them to the next day, go up to someone at work and go say hi and see how that goes. And a lot of people come back and go, wow, I was really surprised. I said hello to that person, and they were really nice and said, hey, how are you doing? And now we're going to go to lunch tomorrow. So it's kind of this brand of therapy to change people's toxic negative thoughts.
Well, before we can even change, though, where do these negative thoughts and toxic or self-defeating thoughts originate?
Yeah, that's a good question. And of course, in psychology, there's almost never just one answer. There's a wide variety of places it can come from. But, a lot of it probably starts in childhood. We learn so much from what our parents, and if your parents aren't giving you time and attention and making you a priority, you could learn very early in life that you're not the priority. Your parents are caught up with, a million and one other priorities, and that can be the beginning of you having low self-esteem, not thinking that you're worthy of people's love or attention, or that you're incompetent, things like that. But if you had a good upbringing, it could come from trauma for sure. People experience, even if whether the trauma occurred in childhood or adulthood, can drastically change the way you think about and understand yourself, the world, your place in this world. So I would say that's one of the major sources would be toxic parenting and then trauma.
So then can I simplify it to basically our beliefs is based on our experience and memories, and it's mainly subjective. It's not really objective in terms of what we think.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one thing that drew me to psychology is this time where I think that there's many times in life where perception matters more than reality.
Perception.
Sometimes reality almost doesn't matter at all,
Right.
but what the perception is what's really the driving force. And I think that what you just mentioned is a great example of that.
So then I guess, so I want to help the listeners be clear. This is almost like the case where a player who will almost always shove aces pre-flop because they're based on their past experiences that even though they won those pots that they don't remember, they always remember the ones that they lost big. Yeah. So then their memories built up of these negative thinking, and then so every time they have aces, their logic is, I'm going to go all in pre-flop to protect myself from this fear of loss. So they basically built on this belief that this is the way to play aces, and no matter anybody to tell them to them is unreasonable and illogical, and they're fixed on this perception that this is the only way. Is that it?
Absolutely, I think that's a big part of it. So obviously it's not self-defeating thoughts necessarily about yourself, but afraid of what might happen and not willing to take a risk that long-term is a worthwhile risk. Sure, you might get burned in the moment. You do that 100 times, you're going to come out ahead, but they're so focused on in this moment, I don't want to get burned. I've been burned before. I'm scared to take that chance. I mean, I've seen people go even further than that. They will go all in pre-flop. They have aces. There's one opponent left that you and I would be begging for that person to call, and they're sitting there hoping the person doesn't call. I've seen people say, while the other person is thinking about calling, turn over the cards and show them aces so that the other person will then fold their hand because they're so scared to get called and risk their entire stack in that moment. And if that's your mindset, you should not be playing poker.
Right. So then how do we help people start changing these mindsets and beliefs? Because I'm of the belief that poker is a microcosm of life. If you could fix these problems in poker, then you could translate and fix these problems in life. So
absolutely.
Behavior, these are mindsets and behavioral thinking, right? So, and you think that people have a chance that we could actually fix this?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think people can fix that. As we were talking a little bit about earlier, I think poker is a lot like life, some aspects of life, in that in some aspects of life, every time you do something right, you immediately get rewarded. You get that immediate feedback that you did it right, or if you do it wrong, you get the immediate feedback that you did indeed do it wrong. And I use the example of like someone trying to learn how to like shoot a basketball. And so when they do it right, when they're on balance, they have their shoulders squared up to the basket, everything, the ball tends to go in. And when they do it wrong, they're off balance, they miss the shot at it. So you get that immediate feedback, did I do it right, did I do it wrong? Poker doesn't always work that way. You can definitely do the right thing and get your butt handed to you, or you could do the right thing, not know you did the right thing, or I'm sorry, do the other thing. You could do the wrong thing, not knowing you're doing the wrong thing, and get massively rewarded for it. So it's really difficult for people to even identify when they're doing it right and when they're doing it wrong, let alone that the need to make the adjustments. So that's the first step, would just be identifying that you've got some thinking here that's wrong. And actually, it made me think about something. So I'm a big fan of college football, and I don't know if you know him, but the head coach at Alabama is Nick Saban, and I'm a little bit jealous because I'm a Florida Gator fan, so I want Florida to have that level. But he has, in a very million-dollar cutthroat world, has been able to dominate and do really, really well. And one thing that he really focuses on is he calls it the process. And the process is kind of like, don't be so outcome oriented. Let's just focus at one thing at a time. You know, you do the play right. And even if it doesn't work out right, if that was the right play to call in that moment, and we went out and executed to the best of our ability, that's all you need to worry about. And so just execute the process and don't worry about the results. And you hear, that happen in poker all the time too. Don't be so results oriented. Just because it worked out for you doesn't mean you did it right, or just because it didn't work out for you doesn't mean you did it wrong. You've got to trust in the process, and sometimes that means you lost 3 sessions in a row, but you did it right. And if you did it right and you trust in the process, you won't deviate from what the right plan is. So I think poker players can learn a lot from basically taking a page out of Nick Saban's book. But in terms of your original question was changing it. Can people change that? So like I said, the first step would be identifying something needs to be changed. But if you're willing and open to say, okay, I don't always make the best decision at the poker table, where can I start making better decisions? It would just be identifying the spots and then learning to make the changes and then trust in the process.
What are some of the current hot ways of you could say behavior therapy right now?
So right now one of the most popular forms is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay.
So with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's a mix of the first part, the cognition. So if someone's experiencing depression or anxiety, let's change some of the self-defeating thoughts that is believed to be causing that. And then also the behavioral piece. Let's change some of the behaviors. So if someone's depressed and they're not exercising, they're not eating right, they're not going out and being sociable, let's also focus on all of those, on changing a person's behavior. Because the underlying belief is that emotions affect behaviors, and in turn, behaviors affect emotions. So we can start to work on one, the other will start to improve, and then you start focusing on the other one, you'll see improvements in the other one, and we can try to start spiraling upward for someone who's been spiraling downward in terms of their emotions and behaviors for a long period of time.
So let's drill it down a little bit more. So cognitive therapy is pretty much the theory, the system. So then one of the things I researched into was EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Is the actual systematic way to train yourself or treat for cognitive therapy. Can you explain more about that one?
Yeah, sure. So EMDR is a pretty popular way to help specifically people who have experienced trauma. Because one of the beliefs here is that part of the reason why people struggle with traumas for years, sometimes even decades after the traumatic event is over, is that the memory that they have of the traumatic event still needs more processing, hasn't been fully processed yet. And I think the reason why people have a lot of PTSD symptoms, so they have intrusive thoughts, they have flashbacks, they have nightmares, is when your body needs you to do something, it'll crave it. So like if your body lacks salt right now, you'll suddenly start craving salt. And I think if your body is lacking, or if your mind is lacking processing of a past traumatic event, it'll constantly make you try to think about it until it can get the processing that it needs. And it can be difficult for people to process because, if you had a really difficult trauma, sometimes just thinking about the event, the emotions, the anxieties associated with it can be overwhelming. So people do everything to avoid thinking about it because it's really unpleasant to think about the event. So let me go distract myself. Let me go drink. Let me get involved in substance use. And maybe not thinking, oh, I'll go do substance use, but that's what they end up doing. And with EMDR, the idea is that while you think about the traumatic event, one, you're in a safe place with the therapist, that hopefully you've got some trust and feel like you got a safety net below you with the therapist in the room. But two, the therapist usually has you moving your eyes from left to right. Oftentimes we'll take like a pencil or something and ask you to follow the pencil with your eyes as they move it back and forth. And the idea is this kind of distracts you a little bit while you're processing the memory. So that way you can think about the memory and not be overwhelmed with the emotions. And if you're not overwhelmed with the emotions, now you can maybe get some of that very needed processing in to try to take this incompletely processed memory into a more completely processed one and put it at rest, put it behind you.
So then let's drill down even more then. So let's bring it to the poker table. Because in poker, there's a lot of, you could say, traumatic events, and especially when let's say you're trying to dodge a flush draw, and all the chips are on the table, and you're waiting for that turn in river. So your eyes is trained, ready to move back and forth, and at the same time, you're also moving in your eyes to watch the players and chips. So how much of how much EMDR is in play here?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point because, well, first of all, in the moment, if you're on a flush draw, it's certainly an emotional moment for you. Maybe not quite the emotional intensity, of like major military combat or sexual assault or something like that. But sure, I mean, our emotions are riding pretty high in that moment. And what's difficult there is that on the inside you're freaking out, but on the outside you're trying to remain and at least appear cool, calm, and collected to your opponents. But certainly, yeah, I mean, your eyes are moving around because you're looking at the players, you're looking at the cards, you're looking, but I think the difference there is that we're in the moment. We're in the moment of that emotional intensity as opposed to bringing up the memory of it. So it's an interesting point, actually, is that if you're moving your eyes to distract yourself to reduce the emotional intensity in the moment of the traumatic experience, like in psychology, we've never been able to really test that, right? 'Cause you can't take people and put them in a traumatic situation and randomly assign some of them to move their eyes and others to not, and then see their longer term outcomes. But it's an interesting concept of the possibility of if you did this while the event was happening, as opposed to processing it later, would that also be helpful? And I think the possibility is a very possible yes.
Because if you could, let's say, in the moment, then wouldn't you be able to develop these skills, coping skills, better? So that way, if we can somehow simulate these less traumatic events through poker, and that way the player could learn how to deal with certain emotions that arises during these traumatic events. Would those skill sets help them later to maybe even deal with these real life stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're really getting at a core psychological principle that we just call emotion regulation. It's exactly what it sounds like, your ability to regulate your emotions. And it's poker players. I mean, we're obviously very practiced at trying to regulate it. Well, okay, not all poker players try to regulate their emotions at the table, but most do. And so we actually practice it quite a bit. And I do think that might translate a little bit into the real world, where at a poker game, on the inside, again, you're freaking out because you're involved in a really big hand, but you're trying to stay calm and cool, at least on the outside. Does that help you in a real life situation? You're in a really intense argument with your spouse right in front of your kids. You need to try to control your emotions a little bit. Are poker players a little bit better able to do that? There is scientific evidence out there with self-control. And people who exercise self-control more often do get better at it. So it's a skill that you can improve over time. And so it's self-control in a lot of areas. Emotion regulation is just one example of self-control.
So then how do we get people to start actually practicing these things? Is there a systematic and practical way for them to maybe practice this at the poker table that you could suggest?
Yeah, one of the best psychological interventions we have for emotion regulation and for other types of self-control, it's called mindfulness, which I think is something that you're very,
right.
And the basic concept behind mindfulness is really teaching a person to be present in the moment, not be living, not having their mind thinking about the past or the future, be present in the moment, and to just sit back and almost observe your emotions. So like maybe you're freaking out in a moment over whatever. Maybe it's a poker hand. Maybe it's because something big is going on in your life. But having that third person observer perspective and just say, isn't this interesting? I'm having this really strong reaction. My heart is racing. I'm breathing heavy. I feel like I want to, run through a wall right now. That's, and being able to observe so you're not just so caught up in the moment, you can be mindful. And it's empirical evidence suggests it's a great way to help people regulate their emotions.
Okay, so let me share this thought process with you in terms of being present in the moment, because before I did start looking into this, you hear there a lot. You hear it in doing yoga, and but it really didn't have any context to me. Being present in the moment, what does that mean? I'm here already. So then, as I dove deeper into it, this is what my thought process is. When you're present, that means that you're observing. Like as a poker player, because when you're observing, you cannot really think. Is that true, or is that like that you cannot do two things at once?
I think when you're an observer, you can still think.
Process a little information.
Yeah, process some of the information.
Okay. So when you're in the state of observation, can you say that you're at the present moment? Whereas if you're in a state of thinking, you're either in the future or in the past?
Oftentimes, yes. So like you said, like someone would say, well, how am I not being present? I'm here right now.
Yeah.
But I think we all know that someone could be physically present, but not emotionally present or not cognitively present because their mind is somewhere else. So this is being both physically present and your mind is present also is a big piece of this. So I think that oftentimes when people are thinking, they're thinking about the future, thinking about the past, like what's going to happen on the river card, or what about that previous hand? That guy beat me and took my whole stack 20 minutes early. I can't wait to get back at him. So your mind could be in places other than the present moment. But I think you can be both present, mindful, and thinking at the same time if you get all those to line up.
You got to practice, right?
But it takes practice, and it's interesting you mentioned meditation, because I mean meditating and you mentioned yoga, but yoga and meditation are two different ways in which people can be much more mindful, much more present. And I was just literally reading a study earlier this week, or a student presented it in my class, that where they were taking people who've never done yoga, never done meditation before, did 10 minutes of it, and then their ability to regulate their emotions right afterwards was measurably increased. And I was blown away that 10 minutes of training to do yoga or meditation could have a measurable impact right away. That was really interesting.
How was that quantified or measured? That's my interest, because one of the things I wanted to look into is using a poker table as actual research lab, where you could actually elucidate certain emotions by causing certain triggers, creating certain triggers. Give somebody a bad beat and let them go nuts. So, how are these emotions measured when the student did this research?
Yeah, good question. Most of it is self-report. So self-reported anxiety, self-reported depression in the moment. Turns out people are actually pretty good at self-reporting, at least things like that. Present state depression, present state anxiety. So it's mostly self-report, but you can also do physiological measures where you hook them up and you're getting current heart rate. You're getting something we call it galvanic skin response. It's measuring the amount of sweat on your finger, and you would be surprised, even if you just if I just showed you maybe a picture of Adolf Hitler, and maybe you don't have this wild emotional reaction, but you're like, oh, okay. You're going to generate a little bit of sweat. You probably can't see it, but our measures are so sensitive, it can pick that up. So we can measure people's emotional reactions that way also.
So there is a quantifiable way to measure this then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, galvanic skin response is an extremely sensitive measure. If you feel the least bit emotional, it will pick it up.
Okay. So then what do you think is the potential of using poker as a research and a way to dive deeper into mental wellness, like we just said, measuring biometrics and emotional regulations and creating certain triggers and see what kind of measures goes off, heartbeats, sweating, I guess pupil dilations, a lot of those things. Is that a possibility, so that we could start developing a systematic way to treatment, combine that with EMRD? Can we develop and actually have a very systematic and practical way to treat mental wellness or mental disease?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it gives you great, in science, obviously, we call it the dependent variable, because if we're doing some experimental designs to test the effectiveness of certain types of therapies or interventions, we want to have a dependent measure to see, does it influence? And having these really sensitive measures of people's ability to regulate their emotions. You can't just measure their emotions. If you want to measure their emotion regulation, I could measure your emotions right now and get your current heart rate and your current blood pressure, but that doesn't tell me about your ability to regulate your emotions. So we want to give you a challenge study where we put you in an emotional situation and then look at the extent to which you go from baseline and that you increase your heart rate and increase your galvanic skin response and your blood pressure and things like that. But yeah, we have very good sensitive measures where if we wanted to test the effectiveness of these interventions and therapies,
it's possible.
It's very possible. We do it all the time.
That's exciting. I think that should be concluded. I'm not sure what else. Do you have any? Let's talk about a little poker, and let's see if we could help the people understand this on a more, I guess, street level. Like, all this ideas is nice, but tomorrow we want to talk about practical. What can somebody do tomorrow to start working on their emotional control of the game?
Yeah, good question. Because really, you're just helping people regulate tilt. And I think that a lot of people, even myself, I've been very guilty of claiming strongly that I'm not on tilt, which means you are on tilt. So one is just your ability to recognize when you're on tilt. But even when you recognize it, your ability to then control it. Well, one, if you're not able to control it, you have to know when to walk away. Right? Well, what's the famous song, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, but does it include when to walk away? Definitely need to know when to just walk away. And there have definitely been times where I should have walked away, and I was like, no, I can do this. Just because I'm on tilt doesn't mean I can't win a hand. That was a bad idea. But I think that people can learn to regulate their emotions if they are tilting a little bit. They want to control their emotions at the poker table. Mindfulness is a great way to do it. If they're bringing emotional baggage to the table because they've got PTSD, they've got trauma, they've got unprocessed, unresolved conflicts in their previous life, I think that those people tend to have worse emotion regulation in general. So it's almost like you're primed. So even if you sit down at a table and then they get a bad beat hand, they're more likely to fly off the handle because of the emotional baggage they brought in.
Right.
So I think getting therapy and just resolving a lot of off the table types of conflicts going on in their mind can help them be more calm and collected and an emotionally regulated person at the poker table. And then in the moment, because even the most level-headed person is gonna feel the sting of some bad beats at poker is inevitably gonna throw at you. So I think that being mindful, I think practicing mindfulness that you can learn through yoga, that you can learn through meditation, is a great way and an easy way too. I'm not asking people to go spend $100 an hour and hours of their life in therapy. If you learn mindfulness, it's very easy to learn and easy to implement at the poker table.
Yes, and that's where I try to hark on the idea of like more poker, more yoga, and more meditation, right?
Absolutely.
And I guess a lot of people just don't think it's that simple. They think it's a lot more complicated. But what is like I tell people yoga is easy. If you could bend over, you could do yoga. What is the number one thing that's stopping people from making this bend over?
Right. To give it a try. Mm-hmm. Probably a lack of faith that it's actually effective. When I first heard about yoga and things like that, I was like, oh, that sounds like what a bunch of, I don't know, goofy hippie people do, but it doesn't really work. But when I've looked at the empirical evidence recently, I've been blown away. Been blown away at one, how easy it is to get involved in. It's not like a really difficult skill to learn, and then two, how effective it is. So it's one of those really underappreciated ways to help people mentally, and people just have to recognize how effective it is.
So because in my previous podcast, number 2, the idea we talked about was hindsight and foresight. So basically what you're saying is people are living off of hindsight. They want this proof first of yoga, and they want all the validation and everything before they do it. Whereas the people who are doing it or everything, the one that are living in foresight, they know the benefit. They can perceive the benefit, and then so they act upon it, and then those are the ones that benefit before it starts happening. Is that pretty much sums it up?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that's a big part of it. But if they're looking for the evidence first before they'll try it, hit me up, hit my email. I got a bunch of empirical papers I will send you that use the scientific method to demonstrate its effectiveness.
All right, sounds good. And that's where we will conclude here. So basically the sum of the story is more poker, yoga, and meditation, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So I thank you for listening. Thank you, Adriel, for coming here. And we are here at Poker House, and they were letting us use their facilities to do this. I appreciate everything. So thank you again, Adriel, for coming, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Tommy.